Welcome back to The Unseen Wisdom, the show where we dig beneath the surface and bring you the stories that really matter. And today we're diving into a story that's been causing a lot of, a lot of debate and, frankly, a lot of anger in the South African National Assembly. And that is the recent casualties of the South African National Defense Force in the Democratic Republic of Congo.
Yeah, this is a story with a lot of layers.
It is a lot of layers. So we're going to try to sort of peel them back one by one here. And I guess to start off, one of the things that strikes me right away is this disconnect between how this mission was, presented to the public and what it seems like our soldiers are actually facing on the ground.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, they kept using the word peacekeeping, but from what we're hearing, it sounds more like they were thrown right into a combat zone.
Yeah.
And, not just against any old force, but against the M23 rebels.
Yeah.
Which, let me tell you, they have some serious firepower. I mean, we're talking drones, sophisticated surveillance, the whole 9 yards.
And I think that's where the real tragedy of this story unfolds. Because, it's one thing to send soldiers into a combat zone, but it's another to send them in when they're completely outmatched.
Oh.
I mean, you said it, these M23 rebels, they have drones, they have fighter jets, they have weaponry that, it's been reported that our soldiers just don't have access to.
Exactly. I mean, there's been members of the National Assembly who have been speaking out about this. And one of the things that really struck me was the fact that they said that our soldiers were forced to ration a single meal ration pack over 2 days.
Yeah, I read that. That's just,
That's not just a logistical issue. That speaks to something much deeper,
It's a complete disregard.
Yeah.
For the well-being of the people that we sent into harm's way.
Yeah.
And so it begs the question, did the South African government knowingly send these soldiers into a situation where they were completely ill-equipped? Or is this a symptom of something much bigger, this decline in our military capabilities that we've been hearing about?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And, unfortunately, I think the evidence points to both. I mean, if you look at the Auditor General's report, it paints a pretty grim picture. They talk about, this sharp decline in flying hours for some of our key Air Force assets.
Yeah, that was
which, directly impacts training, readiness, all of that.
If you don't train for these real-world scenarios, you're going to be caught flat-footed when, what hits the fan.
Exactly. And, that lack of training translates directly into what we're seeing on the ground. I mean, You've got grounded aircraft, shortages of equipment. It's a logistical nightmare for our troops over there.
It's almost like a perfect storm of neglect, mismanagement, and, some pretty disturbing priorities.
Yeah. I mean, speaking of priorities, I think we have to talk about Denel.
Yeah, let's talk about Denel, the elephant in the room.
Exactly. Our state-owned arms manufacturer, which has been, let's just say it, plagued by corruption scandals.
We're talking about diluting of funds, mismanagement so bad that they can barely even produce anything, and even allegations of selling South African defense technology to foreign entities.
It's mind-boggling. I mean, so not only are we failing to equip our own troops, but we may have inadvertently helped arm those who are now using that tech against us.
It's wild. And it's not just Denel, it's this whole trend of outsourcing. I mean, even basic IT services within the Department of Defense are being outsourced, despite the fact that we have the expertise in-house. So the money that should be going to equip our soldiers to make sure that they're safe is being funneled somewhere else.
Yeah.
It's really disturbing. Yeah. And it makes you wonder who's really benefiting from this conflict, because it's certainly not the soldiers on the front lines, and it's certainly not their families back home.
I mean, and it's just so sad because, you see these calls for President Ramaphosa to do something, to take action. People are demanding that we pull our troops out of the DRC altogether.
Yeah.
They're saying it's not worth it,
Right. It's just putting more lives at risk.
Exactly. And, I understand that. I get it. But then the question becomes, what happens if we just pull out?
Right.
What happens to the DRC? I mean, do we just abandon them and let things get even worse?
It's tough because on the one hand, you've got the immediate need to protect our soldiers.
Right.
But then on the other hand, we do have this, commitment to trying to stabilize the region.
Right. It's this constant balancing act.
And this isn't the first time we've been in this situation either. I mean, you look back at what happened in 2013 in Bangui.
Oh, in the Central African Republic? It's like we're doomed to repeat history.
15 soldiers. We lost 15 soldiers.
And for what?
And again, a lot of people are saying we were ill-prepared for that conflict too.
Exactly, and here we are again, more than a decade later, and it's like we've learned nothing.
Nothing. And it just fuels this narrative that the SANDF is being neglected.
Right.
Those in power are just lining their pockets.
And our soldiers are paying the price.
Exactly. They're the ones who are suffering.
It's a betrayal.
It is.
Yeah.
It is. And, and we're not just talking about lives here. We're also talking about money. Billions of rand have been poured into this operation in the DRC, and yet it seems like our soldiers aren't even seeing any of that benefit.
Oh, you're talking about the pay discrepancies?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a whole other can of worms.
Yeah, I was reading about how South African soldiers are being compensated compared to soldiers from other SADC nations.
Yeah, it's shocking.
And it's just not right.
No, it's not. They're risking their lives, and they're getting paid less than soldiers from neighboring countries.
That doesn't make any sense.
And the reason for that is because instead of getting paid directly by SADC for their involvement, their salaries are routed through a completely different system.
Oh, so it's like a middleman situation.
Yeah, and you know what that means.
More opportunity for corruption.
Exactly.
So you've got these soldiers who are out there, they're under-equipped, they're underfed, they're facing down this enemy with superior firepower. And meanwhile, back home, there are people who are profiting from their hardship.
That's the reality of it.
I mean, this is beyond negligence at this point. This is exploitation.
It is. And it all comes back to this cancer of corruption that's just eating away at our defense sector. It's a betrayal of the trust that these soldiers have placed in their government, in their leaders.
And, I keep saying it, they deserve better.
They absolutely do.
They deserve to know that their sacrifices are valued. They deserve to know that they're not just pawns in some political game.
It's about human lives. That's what it comes down to.
Exactly. And that's what we need to remember. It's just so much to unpack here. It feels like we're at this point where, there are all these revelations and it's weighing down on South Africa. The debate in the National Assembly, it's not over.
But by a long shot.
And there's just this feeling, this real palpable sense of, frustration. People want answers.
They want accountability.
They want to know what's going on. And I think one of the things that we have to address right away, one of the most immediate things, is the repatriation of our soldiers who died in the DRC. These delays, this lack of communication, it's just adding to the pain that their families are already going through.
It's agonizing to think that even in death, they can't even be brought home with dignity,
It's a shameful situation.
Yeah.
And, these families deserve closure. They deserve to be able to grieve properly. And the government has said that they're going to, speed up the process. But, trust has been broken.
Actions speak louder than words.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then you have the captured soldiers. What is being done to secure their release? What is being done to make sure that they're okay while they're being held?
It's tough, because it's all very hush-hush, very secretive. There's talk of diplomatic efforts, but nobody really knows what's going on.
It's just this constant waiting game, and it's got to be so difficult for the families.
Not to mention the soldiers themselves.
Of course. It's this whole thing. It just makes you wonder, do we need to completely rethink how we approach peacekeeping? Are we overextending ourselves?
It's a valid question. Are we just getting involved in these conflicts without a clear plan, without the resources to actually make a difference? And maybe even more importantly, without the will to actually see it through?
That's a big question. That's a question that South Africa needs to answer. And if we are going to be involved in these peacekeeping missions, we need to know what our goals are, what our priorities are.
And we need to make sure that we can actually follow through on our commitments. And that means putting our money where our mouth is.
It means investing in the SANDF, and not just with equipment. It means investing in training, in leadership that actually cares about the well-being of our soldiers.
And it means rooting out the corruption that's just eating away at our defense sector. Holding people accountable, rebuilding a culture of, integrity, professionalism. It's a tall order.
It is.
Yeah.
It is. But I think it's also about being honest with the South African people.
Transparency.
Yeah, transparency. We need to understand what the risks are, what the sacrifices are, and what the potential consequences are when we get involved in these kinds of things.
We can't just bury our heads in the sand and pretend that everything's fine.
Exactly. This whole situation with the DRC, it's like it's pulled back the curtain and it's forced us to look at some things that we maybe didn't want to see.
Oh, absolutely. It's made us confront some really uncomfortable truths about where South Africa stands in the world, about our responsibility to our neighbors, And really about our commitment to peace and security.
And it started a conversation, a national conversation.
Which is a good thing.
It is. It is. It's a good thing. And that's where I think, the idea of unseen wisdom comes in, It's about looking beyond the surface. It's about connecting the dots. It's about understanding what's really at stake here.
And realizing that this isn't just about the DRC, it's about us. It's about South Africa. It's about who we are as a nation. What do we stand for?
What kind of legacy do we want to leave behind? I mean, those are big questions.
They are, but they're questions we need to ask ourselves.
So I guess as we wrap up this deep dive, I mean, we still have a lot more questions than answers. But hopefully we've kind of, shed some light on just how complex this situation is, the human cost, the failures.
The need for change.
Yeah. And this isn't the end of the story. This is just the beginning of a new chapter.
Yeah.
And the choices that we make now as individuals, as a nation, they're going to determine what happens in that chapter.
Will it be a story of redemption? Will we see accountability? Will we rebuild trust? Will we actually start prioritizing those who serve our country? Or will we just keep repeating the same mistakes? The same neglect, the same exploitation, the same needless sacrifices?
It's up to us. That's the question we leave you with today. What role are you going to play in shaping South Africa's future? Are you going to demand better from our leaders? Are you going to hold them accountable? Are you going to fight for the well-being of our soldiers? Because if we just stay silent, if we just don't do anything, then these tragedies, they're just going to keep happening.
The wisdom is all around us. We just have to be willing to see it, to ask the tough questions, to demand transparency, to hold our leaders accountable, and to refuse to accept things the way they are.
And to remember that our soldiers, they're human beings.
They have families, they have dreams, they have lives.
When we owe it to them to do better. So thank you for joining us on this journey. Thank you for grappling with these tough issues with us. And thank you for committing to being a part of the solution. The road ahead, it's not going to be easy.
No, it's not.
But I think if we work together, we can demand better. We can build a future where the sacrifices of our soldiers are never forgotten.
And where their service is truly honored.
Absolutely.